And as you remember, law of demand simply says that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, right? So holding other things constant, if the price of something comes down, quantity demanded will increase, vice versa, right? That's the law of demand, right? And what that implies is if you construct a demand curve based on this demand schedule, right? Demand curve will be downward sloping, right? So there's an inverse relationship between the prices and quantity demanded. Okay? Well, I have an interesting question. Is there any exception to this law of demand? Can you think of any example where if the price of something goes up, actually quantity demanded increases? Have you seen any such case? When something becomes more expensive, people buy more of that, holding other things constant. Yeah? No? All right. Let's see. What about diamonds? Yeah. There's what's called the, in economics, water diamond paradox. Water diamond paradox. Yeah. See, water is so important, right? It's so vital to our life. Nobody can, actually nothing can live without water, right? But water is so cheap, right? On the other hand, diamond is, you can't eat it, right? It's not really necessary to our life, right? But that is so expensive, right? How do you explain this paradox? Can you? Anybody? Well, economists explain everything with what? Should be able to explain everything with, Supply and demand, right? Okay, so can you?
There are much more supply in water than diamonds.
That's right, right? So it's a matter of scarcity, actually. Scarcity. Of course, everything is scarce, right? But it's just there's a difference in the amount of availability, right, between the water and diamond, right? So for a certain amount of demand, right, water, I guess, presumably, so abundant, so there is a great supply, right? So the price is relatively low, right? Well, the demand for diamond probably is much lower than the demand for water, but at the same time, the supply is extremely small, right? Okay. Should make it a little bit this way, right? So because supply is so limited, right? The price is much higher than the water, right? Yeah, so you can explain that this water diamond paradox with the supply, right, or limited supply, right? But let's think about an interesting question. Suppose somebody comes up with a technique, right? And with this technique, you can actually synthesize diamond, right? Which is exactly the same as the real diamond. Right now, there is a fake diamond I think it's called the cubic zirconia, something like that, right? Cubic zirconia, right? And it looks just like diamond on naked eye, right? You can't really tell the difference between this fake diamond and real diamond. But if you look very closely using microscope, right, you can tell the difference, right? So it's much cheaper, of course, than the real diamond, right? But suppose someone really invents a way you can actually synthesize real diamond. I mean, real diamond is, of course, it's after all, it's just the carbon something, right? I think it's carbon dioxide, right? CO2, right? And I'm not really good in chemistry. I hated chemistry, okay? But all this carbon and O2, they are constructed in such a way, combined in such a way, right? And then it becomes a diamond, right? So let's say someone succeeded in producing real diamond with carbon and oxygen, right? Something, right? So the price, after all, I mean, it's there's nothing expensive in the ingredients, right? Carbon and oxygen, right? So abundant, right? So if someone, really comes up with a way to synthesize, the price will be really cheap, right? So let's say the diamond price came down to, say, 10 cents per carat. 10 cents per carat, right? Would you be, ladies here, would you be wearing this diamond in your earrings or rings or necklaces? You will still be wearing diamond because it's pretty? No? Probably not, right? If it's so cheap, right? Then it loses the attraction, right? There's a song titled what? Diamonds Are Girls' Best Friend, right? I think was it movie or musical titled Diamonds Are Girls' Best Friend, right? But it's because diamonds are expensive, right? If diamonds are so cheap, cheaper than plastic, right? I don't think anybody will wear diamonds in their earrings, something like that, right? Ladies, do you agree? Yeah? Okay? So, isn't this an exception to the law of demand, right? According to the law of demand, when the price decreases, right, quantity demanded should increase, right? But not with diamond. Right now, there is a great demand for diamond, and the price is so expensive just because it is expensive, right? Just because people buy diamond just because it is expensive, right? Right? Have you thought about that? Right? So this kind of consumption is called conspicuous consumption. Conspicuous consumption, right? Conspicuous means just to show off, right? Show off your wealth, right? You have money, right? People are buying these things, right? And just like those name brand handbags, is it Chanel or Gucci or whatever, right? Louis Vuitton, yeah. If you go to Dongdaemun Market, yeah, you can buy handbags which are just as good as those name brand handbags, right? But those things are expensive when they have labels on it, right? So yeah, that's a similar case, right? Conspicuous consumption, right? All right, so that's kind of an interesting concept to think about when you discuss the law of demand. Okay? Any question so far about the law of demand? And okay, good. Okay, so let's go on, right? So far, we have thought about the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay? But now we are getting into something other than the price, right? If price remains the same, but some other conditions change, what happens to the demand, right? For example, income. Okay? Let's say economy becomes stronger, economy gets stronger, right? And GDP increases, right? So on average, household income increases, people have more money, right? Then what's going to happen to the demand, right? Here's the demand schedule, original demand schedule, right? And it shows quantity demanded at different price level, right? But let's say prices remain the same, but just GDP rises. So on average, people have more money, right? Then you can imagine for most of the things, quantity demanded would increase, like smartphone, for example, right? Some people could not afford the smartphone before, right? But now when they have more income, right, they can afford the smartphone now. So quantity demanded will increase from 8 million units to 10 million units, right? And this will happen regardless of the price level, right? If originally the smartphones were $200 per unit, right? And according to this demand schedule, there was 10 million units demanded, right? But if people have more income, if on average the income level rises, right? Then in this economy, maybe the total quantity demanded would increase to 12 million from 10 million, right? Yeah. So when you show this idea using a graph like this, right? See, originally we had these 5 price quantity combinations, right? And when you connected these dots, it became demand curve. So that's the original demand curve, right? But now, with the higher income, with the price level of $300, now we have 10 million units quantity demanded instead of 8, right? If the price was 250, instead of 9 million, we're going to have 11 million units demanded, and so on, right? So we have a completely new demand curve, right? In other words, the relationship between prices and quantity demanded has changed. This original schedule is not true anymore, right? We have a price level here, and this is a completely new quantity demanded, right? So we have a completely new demand curve. In other words, the relationship between prices and quantities has changed, right? We call that change in demand. Change in demand, right? Okay, so in this case, if the demand curve shifts to the right, just like the previous case, previous slide, right? We say demand increased, right? If that's because with the same price, at the same price as before, quantity demand is larger from Q1 to Q3, right? So we say demand has increased. Yeah? If the demand curve shifts to the left, that means at the same price, P1 level, right? Quantity demanded will be lower, right? So we call it a decrease in demand, right? Leftward shift of the demand curve means demand decreased. Okay? Right? So this is different from the previous case. Last class we talked about just the movement along the curve, right? Here, when the price changes from 300 to 250, right? We move from this point to this point, right? There was no change in this relationship. Relationship is still the same, right? We simply move from this line to this line, right? Which means we have moved from this point to the another point, right? On the original demand curve. We still have the same demand curve, right? So it's called the movement along the curve. Yeah? It's not a change in demand. Demand stays the same, right? We simply move from one point to another point on the same demand curve, right? Okay? Right? So, what are those factors that can change the demand, right? Well, most prominently, we usually pick these 5 factors. Right? First one is income of consumers. Yeah? And regarding the effect of income on quantity demanded, or relationship between the income and the demand, right? Most of the cases, most of the goods, right? When people have more money, demand increases. Whether it's apparel, let's say clothing, right? Or entertainment, or education, or any equipment like TV or smartphones, those things, computers, right? When the general income level rises in the economy, right, the demand will shift to the right, right? Then we call them normal good. Okay? But for certain things, we can imagine the relationship will be different, actually opposite, right? When people have more money, they will buy less of this item. What can be an example? When people have more money, they consume less of this particular item. McDonald's. Why? Why do you say McDonald's?
They sell cheap hamburgers.
Hamburgers are cheap, right? Yeah. The idea is correct, right? Yeah, that's this thing we're talking about is the very inexpensive things, right? So usually poor people, right? People who have less money, right? Will usually consume this item, right? So as soon as they have higher income, they're gonna move up to different item, right? Move away from this item, right? Or when people have less money, they'll come back to this item, right? So when the let's say whatever it is, income rises, the demand for X goes down, right? So let's say this was the initial demand, right? And let's say initial price and quantity. Yeah? And let's say people now have higher income, right? Then demand for this thing at the same price. There's no change in price, but just because people have higher income, right? Quantity demanded will be lower, right? So that means we now have a completely new relationship, right? New demand curve. Okay? Usually McDonald's is not considered this type of good, right? In the United States, we usually use the example of macaroni cheese or mac cheese. Macaroni cheese dinner. You know what it is? Macaroni. It's a little pipe-shaped pasta. Little tiny pieces like that, right? And you just boil this pasta and just spread cheese on top of it, right? And this is the usual dinner for college students, right? So it's the American version of ramen. Right? So cheap and quick, right? So easy to make, right? Just boil the pasta and just spread the cheese on top of it, right? So it's a very, very popular dinner for college students, right? And every college student says, well, as soon as I graduate and get a job, I'm never going to touch this mac cheese again. They're sick of it, right? I'm going to have steak dinner, right? So that's an example of what we call inferior good, right? Inferior good is something for which the demand decreases when the income level rises, vice versa. If the income level decreases, demand increases for this item, right? Here, the example given a second-hand clothing, used clothing, right? Or you can go to, you can ramen noodle, right? Or macaroni cheese dinner, something like that. Those are inferior goods. Yeah? Make sense? Yeah? So most of the items, including McDonald's, right, are considered normal goods, right? When people have more money, right, demand increases for that item, right? But certain things, very low-priced, usually low-priced, low-quality goods, right, are considered inferior goods, right? Can you think of any other example of inferior good? What?
Cubic.
Zirconia? Cubic zirconia?
No, cubic.
Yeah, you mean the fake diamond. What do you think? When people have less money, demand for cubic increases? Well, it's still it's not a necessity, right? I mean, it's a kind of a luxury, right? Still, even if it's a fake diamond, I mean, it's used for those ornaments, right? And I don't think demand for cubic will actually increase when people get poor, right? Some potatoes are considered inferior good, right? Because it's a kind of inferior source of carbohydrate, right? Potatoes. So, yeah, usually when the general income level becomes lower, demand for potatoes increases, right? Maybe not in Korea, yeah? But in Western society, the potatoes are kind of staple, like rice in Korea, right? So, yeah, what else? For college students, very low quality beer. I guess in Korea, there aren't many brands of beer available, right? But in the when you go to U.S., let's say, let's say, what's that? Budweiser? Budweiser, let's say it's about, say, trying to remember, let's say $3 per bottle. And there's a brand called the Black and White, Red, White, Blue, Red, White, Blue, right? It's something like $1 per bottle, right? Oh, Black Label. Black Label is actually a Canadian beer, right? And it's very cheap. So college students, a lot of college students drink this black label or red, white, blue, and the next day you're gonna get a good headache from this low quality beer, right? So maybe those things are, considered the inferior good, right? All right, and then the second factor that will change the demand is the price of related goods. Price of related goods. Right? When the price of the own price of the good changes, right, then it's not going to change the demand, right? Let's say price of what can be a good example? Fries and ketchup, let's say. Potato fries and ketchup. Okay? So here's the demand for potato fries. Yeah? And if the price of potato fries increase, let's say from P0 to P1, right? What is it going to do to the demand for fries? When the price of potato fries increase, what's going to happen to the demand for potato fries?
It's going to decrease. The quantity demanded is.
Right. What's going to happen to the demand for fries? Huh? If the price of fries increased? Right. Demand is not going to change. Remember that, right? There's no reason for the demand to change, right? Because the demand curve covers the entire price range, right? So whatever the price goes up or down, you're going to simply move up or down along the existing demand curve, right? There is absolutely no reason for the demand to change. The relationship between prices of fries and quantity demanded of fries stay the same exactly, right? You're simply moving from one price to another price, right? So nothing's going to change in the demand for fries, right? But when the price of fries changes, right, something may happen to the demand for ketchup. Ketchup demand, right? What's going to happen to the demand for ketchup if the price of fries increases? It's going to shift what? To the right or to the left? To the left, which means a decrease in the demand for ketchup, right? Why?
Because they are complementary.
Huh? Yeah. Because what? Because quantity demanded for fries will decrease from Q0 to Q1. In other words, people will consume less fries, less amount of fries, which means they will use less amount of ketchup, right? But the thing is, price of ketchup didn't change, right? So whatever the price was, let's say P0, okay? Nothing happened to the price of ketchup, but suddenly, just because price of fries changed, right? People buy less ketchup, right? So now we have completely different demand curve, right? Relationship between the prices and quantity demanded for ketchup changed. Okay? That's what happens, right? So if price of X goes up and the demand for Y goes down like this, right? What do you call that? Well, we call X and Y are complements. Right? X and Y are complements. C-O-M-P-L-E, not I. If you use I, that's praising. Yes, but complement, L-E, complement means these two things are used together. X and Y tend to be used together at the same time, right? Something like hot dogs and hot dog buns, yeah? In the US, used to be beer and beer nut. In Korea, beer and chicken. Chimak, right? Beer and chicken, right? So right now, what? Because of this AI thing, what's AI stand for? Avionic influenza, right? Bird virus, right? So the price of chicken went up. Well, we didn't talk about supply yet, right? But well, the reason why the price of chicken went up was what? What happened to the chicken market? From the original price, price went up. Why? What happened? Supply decreased. Because all this AI, we had to kill and bury all the live chicken, right? So the supply of chicken shifted to the left, right? So the price increased, right? So when the price of chicken increases, what happens to the demand for beer? Demand for beer? Huh? What do you think? Will that do anything when the price of chicken goes up? Demand for beer shifts to the left, right? At the same price, because people eat less chicken, right? Quantity demanded goes down. Less chicken are consumed, right? So suddenly, even if the beer price remained the same, right? Quantity demanded for beer will be lower, right? Which means we have a completely new relationship, right? Demand shifted to the left, or demand for beer decreased, right? That's the idea of complement, right? Complement. Since beer and chicken are consumed together, right, at the same time, right? When the price of X goes up, demand for Y goes down. When the price for X goes down, demand for Y will increase, right? It's called complement. Some other things tend to be used together. Used instead of. X tends to be used instead of Y, right? Here, the examples are Big Mac and Whopper. Big Mac is, sold by McDonald's. Whopper is sold by Burger King, right? And a lot of people consider them, what? Replaceable or substitutable, right? So if McDonald's raises the price of Big Mac, what's going to happen to the demand for Whoppers? First of all, will it change the demand for Big Mac? if McDonald's raises the price of Big Mac, right? Will it change the demand for Big Mac? Next time you get shot, right? If the price of Big Mac increases, will that change the demand for Big Mac? Absolutely not, right? Don't you understand still?
Quantity demand is going to change.
Yes, quantity demand is going to change, but demand is not going to change like here, right? So this is the demand for Big Mac, right? If the price goes up from P0 to P1, right? You're going to move from this point to another point on the same demand curve, right? Relationship between the price and quantity does not change, right? We still have the same relationship between the prices and quantities of the Big Mac, right? So change in own price will never, never, never change the demand. Remember that, okay? If something other than the own price changes, then the demand will change, okay? Like income, like price of Whopper, right? If Burger King lowered, suppose this week Burger King is having a sale, right? So they have lowered the price of Whoppers. What is it going to do to the demand for Big Mac?
It's going to decrease.
It's going to decrease, right? Right? So, yeah. Here's the demand for Big Mac, and here's the demand for Whoppers, right? And suddenly they're charging lower price, okay? Price for Big Mac went down. They're having a sale, right? And what's going to happen to the demand for Big Mac? Yeah, nothing happens to the demand, right? But quantity demanded will what? Increase. In other words, more people will buy McDonald's or Big Mac, right? Which means what? Lunchtime, there are people who go for hamburger for lunch, right? But because this week there's a big sale in McDonald's, right? More people go to McDonald's, which means less people will go to Burger King, right? So, suppose Burger King did not change their price, right? Their price is still the same as before, right? But suddenly they will sell less than previous amount, right? Original quantity, right? So quantity demanded for Whopper goes down at the same price, which means we are off the original relationship. This is the original relationship between the price and quantity for Whoppers, right? But now that relationship has changed, right? So we have a new relationship, right? Or demand changed, or demand decreased, right? So here, price of X went down, demand for Y went down, right? Okay. If the price of X goes up, suppose McDonald's raised the price of Big Mac, right? Then what's going to happen to the demand for Whopper, right? It's going to increase, right? Some people will shift from McDonald's to Burger King, right? Right? So the demand for Burger King will increase, actually, right? So if we have this kind of relationship, right? Then we say X and Y are substitutes. Substitutes, right? You can substitute one for the other. You can substitute x for y, right? In other words, you can use x instead of y, right? Okay. So examples are Ford F-150 and Dodge Ram. Those are pickup trucks, okay? Ford F-150 is the best-selling pickup from Ford. Dodge Rams are the best-selling pickup from Chrysler, right? Dodge Chrysler, right? Jeans and khakis, yep. These both are what? Casual slacks, pants, right? So you can consider them as substitutes, right? And so on. Any question about this? All right. This is an example. That's just a real-world example. Tablet substitutes for e-readers. E-readers are just equipments designed to show e-books, right? So, Amazon and Borders. Those are bookstores, right? Produce their own e-readers, right? Because now e-books are becoming more popular, right? But I think about 10 years ago, they started selling these e-readers, right? Which are very convenient. I mean, these things are light, small, right? Lighter than usual tablets, right? Because they don't have many functions, right? The tablet PCs, you can do many things, right? But these e-readers, the functions are very limited, right? So usually these things are very light, right? And less expensive, right? But then a few years later, tablet PCs became very popular, right? And also, initially tablet PCs were very expensive, right? But as years go by, the tablet PCs prices came down, right? And as a result, the sales of e-readers decline, right? As you see here, right? As tablets have become more popular in the early 2010s, worldwide sales of e-readers have fallen, right? From 23 million to only 5.8 million in 2 years, right? I think they still sell e-readers, but the very few people buy actually e-readers because tablet, you can use tablet to read all the e-books, right? So, what do you think? Are they substitutes? Okay, yeah. I think the idea is correct, but according to what our textbook, what we just learned from our chapter, this is not a really accurate statement. Right? In order to qualify as substitutes, you have to have this relationship, right? Price of something changes, as a result, demand for the other thing changes, right? In this statement, right, they did not really talk about the price of tablets, right? What they have is just the quantity of tablets and quantity of e-readers, right? So I guess the underlying assumption here is as the tablet PCs became more popular, right, the prices of tablet came down, right? So prices of tablet PC came down. As a result, we've seen the decline in the demand for e-readers, right? Then we can say tablet PCs and e-readers are substitutes. You understand what I'm saying? Okay? Yeah. Make sure you have that clear understanding about the substitutes. Yeah. All right, the rest, other factors are relatively easy, like consumer taste. Okay? Well, consumer taste changes, of course, right? Something becomes very popular and fashionable, right? Like dressing style or women's skirt length, okay? Sometimes mini skirts are very popular. A few years later, you know, the longer, what we call midi or maxi or whatever, right? So, you know, the consumer taste always changes, right? Depending on the consumer taste, right, the demand will be affected, right? Here they use an example of fast food. The demand for fast food, like McDonald's, right? If people become more health conscious, right, then of course the demand for fast food will decrease, right? Holding other things constant, of course, right? Holding other things constant. If the consumer taste changes, right, then the demand will be affected, right? Population and demographics, of course, that's an obvious concept. If the society has more people, if the population increases, right, then of course demand will increase for most of the things, right? Holding other things constant, right? Holding other things constant. If the population increases, right, then the demand will shift to the right, right? Vice versa, right? If population decreases, right, then demand for everything goes down. In Korea, what has been happening with the demand for elementary, middle, high school education? Demand for elementary school education? Huh? It has decreased significantly, right? A lot of elementary schools had to be closed, right? Because, what was the reason? Yes, population change, right? So the children, elementary school children, population shrink, right? So the demand for elementary education shifted to the left, okay? Okay. Finally, the expectation about future prices matters, right? If people think the prices will increase in the future, right? Price of, let's say, smartphone will increase in the future, right? Then what's going to happen to the demand for smartphone today? It's going to increase, right? People will try to buy it before the price goes up. And that's what's happening with the real estate, right? Like apartments, right? Because people think the price of apartment will rise in the future, right? They buy those real estate right now, right? They're trying to buy, right? Real estate now, right? Before the price rises, right? If you know somehow that tomorrow the gasoline price will be higher, right? Actually, about a year ago, it happened with the cigarettes, right? In Korea, they raised the taxes on cigarette significantly, right? So I think it happened in the beginning of 2016, right? The January of 2016, right? So towards the end of 2015, what happened to the cigarette market? Does anybody remember what happened towards the end of 2015?
There were people buy cigarettes in advance.
Right. They call the hoarding, right? They would try to buy as much cigarette as possible, right? Before the price increases, right? So as a result, there was a shortage of cigarettes in the market, right? You couldn't buy a cigarette, right? So that's what people do, right? depending on the expectation about the future, right? Well, if they think price will decrease in the future, what's going to happen to today's demand? It will decrease. People will wait, right? They're not going to buy now, right? They will wait until price goes down, right? So all these manufacturers like LG or Samsung or Apple, right? They try not to announce the future release date for the new equipment, right? Because if people know that pretty soon the new version will come out, right? Then they're not going to buy the current version, right? So they try to keep it secret, right? A few months ago, I was interested in buying a smart watch, right? The Samsung Gear 3, right? That looks really nice, right? But I heard LG was going to release a new version pretty soon, right? I think they did this month, right? In March, right? So I was waiting, right, to see this new smartwatch from LG, right? I don't know. I always use the LG smartphone, right? And somehow it's easier for me than Samsung version, right? My wife uses Samsung, right? But so yeah, that's what they do, right? But you can't keep it secret because you have to get it approved by the some government organizations, yeah. FCC. FCC is what? Federal Communication Committee? Is that Communication Committee? Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So they oversee. If you're going to produce something uses airwaves, right? Then you have to be approved by that equipment has to be approved by FCC, right? So you have to send the version or design and or the sample to FCC, right? And the FCC engineers leak their words. Hey, Samsung's going to release a new version, right? Pretty soon, right? And it's got all kinds of new function, right? So words get out, right? And so on, something like that. Yeah. All right. So here's the summary. Summary of what we have been discussing, right? You have to distinguish between the change in quantity demanded versus change in demand, right? What brings the changes in quantity demanded? A change in the own price. When the price changes on something, right? You're going to move down along the initial demand curve. You're going to move from point A to point B, right? And that is not a change in demand. Demand curve is still the same, right? But you're simply moving from one point to another point along the existing demand curve, right? So we call it simply a change in quantity demanded. And that's different from change in demand, right? If something other than the own price changes, any changes other than own price may bring a change in the demand, which means entire demand curve shifts, right? So even at the same price, at $300, right? We're going to move from point A to point C, which means the quantity demanded increased at the same price, right? And that implies we have a completely new relationship. Existing demand schedule is no longer true, right? We have a completely new relationship. And this graph shows we have a completely new demand curve, right? That's what we call a change in demand. So you have to be careful, right? You have to separate these two things. Otherwise, you won't be able to analyze anything, right? It will be very confusing, right? Make sure you understand this difference clearly, right? Any question? Right? Once you understand these things about the demand, the understanding supply is very simple because we are talking about exactly the same thing in the opposite direction, right? So here's a supply schedule and supply curve, right? Supply schedule, of course, shows the relationship between prices and quantity supplied, right? What do we mean by quantity supplied? Well, quantity supplied is the amount of goods and services that producers are willing and able to supply to the market at different prices. Let me repeat. Let's see, where is it? Okay. I didn't put the definition of quantity supplied, but you can go back to the quantity demanded, right? It's exactly the same thing, right? You simply change the consumer to producers, right? And quantity demanded to quantity supplied, right? So quantity supplied is exactly the amount of goods and services that producers are willing and able to supply, right, to the market, right, at different price level, right? So at each price level, the producers are willing and able to supply 12 million units of smartphone, right? If the price comes down to 250, right, a little less will be supplied, right? What? Why? So we have an opposite relationship, right? Law of demand says there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, right? Law of supply says what? There is direct relationship or positive relationship between price and quantity supply. In other words, if the price increases, quantity supplied will increase, right? If the price decreases, quantity supplied will decrease. Why?
Because the companies want to make more revenue.
Revenue is not ultimate goal of the company. Profit, yes. And profit, we use a Greek letter pi for profit because in economics we use P for what? Price, right? So we use pi for profit, right? Profit is simply total revenue minus total cost, okay? And total revenue is simply P times Q, right? How many units you sell multiplied by the price you charge, right? That's the total revenue, right? How much money you receive as a result of sale, right? So if you sold 100 units at $5 each, right? Total revenue will be $500, right? That's the sales receipt or sales revenue, right? From that, you subtract total cost, how much it costs to produce and supply those units, right? The difference is profit, right? And the businesses or suppliers, their goal is to maximize profit, right? Profit maximization, that's the goal of businesses, right? So, if the price rises for whatever the reason, right? Price goes up, what happens to what? First of all, revenue, total revenue. When the price goes up,
It's going to increase.
it's going to increase, right? And holding other things constant. In other words, your cost remains the same, right? The labor cost or material or whatever, right? Utility, right? There's no reason for those things to change. So assuming all those things remain the same, somehow you were able to charge higher price for your product, right? Then of course your profit can increase, right? In other words, your business becomes more profitable. Your product becomes more profitable, right? Or we can think about the okay. You can understand it this way. Total cost is you can write it AC times Q. AC is the average cost or per unit cost. Okay? So let's say you're charging $5 per unit, right? And right now you're selling 100 units, right? And it costs, say, $2 per unit to produce, right? So that's going to be, the total cost will be $200, right? Or you can write it this way. So if you think about it, it's going to be P minus AC times Q, right? That's your profit, right? Total profit is simply the difference between price and the average cost times how many units you sell, right? So of course, if the price goes up for some reason, right, then your profit will increase, right? And it becomes more profitable, right? Well, obviously, then if you can sell more, your profit will be even larger, right? Because your product suddenly became more profitable, right? Every unit you previously, right? Before the price change, every unit you sell, you used to make $3, right? $3 profit per unit, right? But if you can charge, say, $7 instead of $5, right? Then suddenly you can make what? $5 profit per unit, right? Well, what are you going to do, right? You'll probably invest more money here and borrow money from the bank and buy more equipment, right? Install another assembly line, right? Because the more you produce, a lot more money you can make, right? So that's the idea, profit motivation, right? So the reason behind this law of supply is profit motivation, right? So producers, suppliers, right? They can make larger profit if the price goes up, right? And that's why they are going to increase the quantity supply, right? Okay, what else? All right, so we can talk about the same thing, right? When the price changes, let's say this is the supply of smartphone, whatever, right? Supply of smartphone. If the price of smartphone goes up, what's going to happen to the supply of smartphone? You're dead. If the price of smartphone goes up, what happens to the supply for smartphone? Will it increase or decrease? Neither. Demand never changes when the own price supply never changes when the own price changes, right? Because this supply schedule covers already all the price range. So when the price changes, this relationship doesn't need to change. You simply move from one price to another point, another price, right? So you're moving from one combination to another combination on the existing supply curve, right? There is no reason for that relationship between the price and quantity supplied will change, okay? So change in own price never changes supply, right? Again, but if something other than the own price changes, then supply will change or shift, right? Those factors are price of inputs, technological change, blah, 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 right? We'll continue this on Thursday, okay? Any question? Oh, yeah, so let me show you this before you go. Yeah, so go to the multimedia library, and you can choose digital interactive on demand and supply, and just go through this thing. Just follow through the instruction, right? It's not going to be graded, right? But you'll find it very interesting, right? And it'll help you understand much better, the demand and supply analysis, right? And you can do it at your leisure, yeah? Let's say within a week or so, okay?